This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
The Pitt Panthers have pulled a stunning upset over the West Virginia Mountaineers and denied them a place in a national championship game.
We're going back to December 1st, 2007. For one of the games that college football fans know about, because West Virginia on the cusp of a national championship berth, all you got to do is beat your rival who stinks this season, and you're at home, and you got a great offense. Like, what else could go wrong? But it's a crazy game. There's so much surrounding this game in 2007. Commercials, coaches, crowd, broadcast elements, songs, music, everything about this game was pretty incredible going back just 13 years, but it seems like it was in 4 decades ago with everything happening. But so many memories of this game, and it was even better going back and reliving it. Plus, one of the up-and-coming media stars was the GOAT in this game, which many people forget about because he's overcome that awful night in West Virginia. So, welcome into Distant Replay Podcast. I'm Ben George. He is Mike Noto. Mike, this game, I mean, you threw it out there. I was automatically in because this game, there's a lot to talk about in this game and reliving it. But, man, this was a full broadcast and so much to kind of get to in this game.
The 2007 college football season, which we'll get to here a little bit later on in this episode, was absolutely insane. When they talk about quote-unquote BCS chaos, it comes from this season. The season was crazy, and this game sort of fit into the context of that season perfectly.
Absolutely. And let me remind you, we'll get into that right now, but I want to remind you too, distantreplaypodcast.com. We're going to put the game there. So if you want to go back and watch the game, and it's worth your time, absolutely. It's not even a long broadcast, even with commercials that are still on there. So it's worth your time going back there. But find us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well. Let's start that 2007 season because that was one of the wildest college football seasons of all time. And you had the BCS. This was pre-playoff. So you're always looking at that 1 and 2 line on the rankings. Well, throughout the season, and they pointed out in this game, because West Virginia comes in second ranked, they are 1 game away from going to the national championship. And number 2 teams this season were getting beat left and right. It seemed like anybody that got in that spot, essentially from like October on, it was like a 1-week stay.
We could go through and list all the crazy stuff that happened. I don't know if you want to do that or not, but it was absolutely, it just every week you were looking at that top of the national championship race, and it was constantly changing. And all the games, like these teams were losing at the top of the BCS standings, and a lot of times they were losing to teams that weren't even ranked.
I know. Like
these upsets were coming out of nowhere, which made it even more intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the BCS rankings, and we'll kind of go through these fairly quickly. We won't spend a ton of time on it, but when the first one came out, it was Ohio State, South Florida, Boston College, and LSU. South Carolina and Kentucky were 6 and 7. Okay, that was this season. Completely different era of college football, obviously. Then you had Boston College move up because South Florida lost. Then Boston College, they lost, so LSU moved up a line. Well, LSU lost. Oregon moved up a line. Kansas, meanwhile, was 10-0 in Week 11. Kansas got to the 2 spot with LSU at the 1 spot. Sorry, LSU actually lost a couple weeks later than I said. But anyway, you go into Week 13. Missouri's number 1. Okay, the week we're in. Missouri's number 1 in the country. Yes, Missouri, 11-1. West Virginia's 10-1. Ohio State's 11-1. Georgia's 10-2. Kansas is 11-1. LSU, by the way, is sitting back there in 7th at 10-2.
And if you know the context of what ended up happening this season, you know how important it is what Ben just said regarding LSU. But simultaneously when this game is going on, you have number 1 Missouri playing against Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. And you have West Virginia, which it looked like at the time, the dust settled. You had West Virginia with a layup rivalry game at home. They were going to be the team that sort of benefited from all this BCS chaos throughout the year. That's at least the way it looked heading into this game.
Yeah, it was the whole conversation was, okay, West Virginia's 98% in the game. Who will they play in the BCS National Championship game? I mean, that was the conversation. West Virginia was a 28.5-point favorite in this game.
You got and looking at the other game that was going on simultaneously that I mentioned, I think people thought Oklahoma was a threat to Missouri, but 28.5 point favorite. No one thought that Pittsburgh was a threat to West Virginia.
No, absolutely not. And you had the Oklahoma game going on. We're getting updates in the studio, by the way, from Reese Davis in studio with Lou Holtz and Mark May. Oh man, what a time and era of college football television.
Yeah, because you got to remember now, Chris Fowler's still doing game day at this point.
Yep.
So Reese Davis is in the studio. This is a top-notch studio team. We never talk about studio teams in these podcasts, but this one is worth talking about. Mark May and Lou Holtz, from the outside looking in, may look like an unlikely pair, but they were great together on TV.
Man, they were awesome. They were so much fun, and their college football final show was like must watch TV for me every single week as they recap things and with their personalities. And Reese was the perfect host for those two guys, and they put on a show, and it was entertaining, and it was great to see them in that spot again. Now, of course, I'm happy that Reese Davis is doing game day. He's great with that, but man, that took me back seeing those guys in the studio. So at this period, Mike, we're both at ESPN too. So this is like this is probably my first college football season there, which is crazy. I think yours, second or third?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So we're right in the middle of this day in, day out. And some of the other storylines that are going on in this game too, and just kind of setting the stage of where we are in the history of, not only college football, but sports. So you even had like the Sean Taylor trial news going on too. After he had been murdered, they were having updates about the guys that had been arrested.
Yeah, me and Ben both worked that horrific Sean Taylor event sort of up close and personal when we were at ESPN, being there when the news broke and everything. And yeah, this was the day that it was announced that, the 4 people that were charged in his murder were arrested. So that's another thing that's going on with sort of the breaking news on the scroll and the breaking news sort of from SportsCenter as this broadcast went on.
And the other crazy part too is you go back to this time, and we're talking about LSU and kind of where they stand with Les Miles. Saban is just a few years removed from there. Now he's at Alabama in his first season at Alabama. But the other thing that's going on, and I always forget how early this was in Les Miles' career. I always think of it being a little later on. But at this time, Les Miles, again, is in his third season at LSU. He's gone 11-2 his first 2 years, taken over again from Nick Saban. He's got his team on the verge. I mean, they're in the mix. They don't seem like an obvious chance here for a national championship this year because they already have 2 losses. But this is the year that all those reports came out, I think from Herb Street at ESPN, that he was going to be the guy going to Michigan.
That was a legit, like you said, it was Herb Street. So a big name reporter. We're not talking about some, wacko blogger who just, randomly put something out on the internet. That was a thing back then. And you thought going into this game that it was a possibility Les Miles would go to Michigan because LSU was so much on the outside looking in for a national title berth. We find out throughout this game that Les Miles is not going to take the job at Michigan.
Right.
But that was a major storyline leading up to this Saturday of college football.
And I think it was because I just thought it came after he had established himself a little bit more. I know he had a good run at Oklahoma State and, got off to a good start at LSU, but I forgot it came that early. And I think it came that week going into the SEC championship game, which was also this Saturday. During this game that we're watching, it was earlier in the day. They played number 14 Tennessee, won that game 21-14 in Atlanta to win the SEC, and they were just kind of in a waited see because they had lost in 3 overtimes twice that season, LSU, to Kentucky in 3 overtimes, and then to Arkansas in 3 overtimes. So they had good wins. They had beaten 2 top 10 teams in Virginia Tech and Florida. They'd beaten the ranked South Carolina, Auburn, Alabama, and Tennessee. But I don't know how many people thought they had a chance to jump all the way from 7-2, especially considering that nobody expected West Virginia to lose.
Yeah, no one did. No one expected that to happen. That's why the rumors were so strong he was going to go to Michigan. If he was coaching a team that was reasonably expected to get to the BCS championship, we're not talking about that yet, maybe after the season. And we also didn't even mention that number 1 Ohio State at one point in the season lost to Juice Williams and Illinois, right? The season was so nuts that those upsets weren't even like the main storyline of the season. You have Illinois rolling against Ohio State and beating them. Any other season, that's like the marquee upset. But this season was just complete chaos. But again, can't stress enough. We come to the final, Saturday of the season, Big East matchup in Morgantown, and all West Virginia needs to do is beat a Pittsburgh team that frankly is not that great, and they make it to the national championship.
The other thing crazy about this time is that Illinois loss came second to last game of the season for Ohio State, and their last game was November 17th. So this is back when the Big Ten, they had stopped playing football 2 weeks prior. All these other teams are continuing to play. Their season's been done for 2 weeks, and that's what was crazy. They had a huge layoff between, their final game, and there's so much going on this season. Okay, so let's bring it back into what we have in this game. West Virginia, again, number 2 in the country. Pittsburgh comes in with, as you mentioned and I mentioned, an awful team, right? I mean, this Pitt team, it had a LeSean McCoy, young LeSean McCoy on this team, but otherwise, I mean, this squad came in already with 7 losses.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, first of all, let's give credit to Shady McCoy. He looks just as good when he's a freshman in college than he did in the NFL.
Yeah, he was fun to watch.
They explained why he sort of slipped through the cracks and ended up at Pittsburgh, but he's a guy that must have been on top of everyone's recruiting board when it came to his class, but had some injuries that sort of set him back. But the rest of this Pittsburgh roster, nondescript, does not even begin to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, they had a couple of draft picks off this team, and obviously, LeSean McCoy was the biggest name. But, I mean, their quarterback, Pat Bostic, I don't remember this dude.
Look, to put it very nicely, he's not the reason why they were very competitive in this game. Just to put it very nicely. We're talking about Pittsburgh. This is a program who's had Larry Fitzgerald, Aaron Donald, Shady McCoy, like we just mentioned. It's not like they never have good players come through Pittsburgh.
No, right.
This was a downtime personnel-wise for them.
It was a downtime personnel-wise, and you could see that on the field. But their head coach was Dave Wannstedt. Dave Wannstedt, by the way, who, when they finally got the first shot of him on the TV, had his crutches. He was walking the sideline on crutches. Did you remember that?
I did not remember it. And those crutches, I was speechless when I saw them, and I'm speechless now. They literally become a major storyline in the game because, throughout the game, he's got the crutches on, and he's, pointing to people with the crutches. The guy's got a torn Achilles, and he's not in the booth. He's on the sideline. Ultimate football guy move. Those crutches were just flat out a good time. Crutches are involved, freezing cold weather, big game, Dave Wannstedt and his mustache pointing those crutches around. It added a dimension to the game that, to be honest with you, I did not see coming.
The best part to me was there was a number of calls that he disagreed with, as well as the broadcast did disagree with. And every time he got upset, he acted like he was going to throw the crutches at somebody. That was my favorite part. Every time they got to him, he was holding the crutches back. He pulled them off. He had both of them in his hand, and we're ready to toss them on the field. Yeah,
that's such a good point. And you got to remember with Wannstedt, the reason Wannstedt was really well known was he had coached with Jimmy Johnson with the Cowboys in the early 90s, right? Very integral part of their coaching staff. But what he was known for during this time period, Ben, I don't know if you remember when he used to coach the Bears.
Yeah.
And it was right when PTI was starting. And Wilbon, who's a big Chicago fan, he's like a fan. So he didn't really agree with a lot of Wannstedt's stuff. And Kornheiser used to refer to Wilbon as your boy, Wani. That's how he used to refer to him. And whenever he wanted to dig Wilbon and get Wilbon going, that's how he would refer to Dave Wannstedt. So it was just then funny to see that guy during this time period trolling the sideline with crutches.
Yeah, and he was still a pretty big name, as you mentioned at that time. He's since kind of faded, but yeah, he still carried a lot of clout at that point, and he had his team. I wouldn't even say ready to play this game, Mike. That might even be too kind. Because, despite the way this turned out, this team had no business winning, and we'll get into that. Let's go to the other sideline. West Virginia. Now, West Virginia, obviously the big name in this game. There was a lot of good players, good coach. This was a really good time in West Virginia football. In the middle of a really good time for Big East football, too, by the way, which, maybe doesn't get enough credit because the Big East has since broken up, and, it's a completely different conference. But West Virginia was really good. Cincinnati was good. 10 wins this year. UConn, yes, believe it or not, UConn used to be good in football. South Florida was good at this time. Rutgers was still good. There are some good teams. That's not even with Pittsburgh being any good right now, or Syracuse. They were bad this year, but some really good teams. But you talk about this West Virginia team. At this time, I mean, this West Virginia team was dynamic, and there were a lot of people tuning in to watch this team play.
Oh, this West Virginia team was one of those teams that was must watch because they were doing something on offense that you could tell me if I'm wrong, Ben, but the spread is very common now, right? Too common if you ask me. But back then, they're one of the first teams I could remember that were really good on a national stage. Like they were a very good team that happened to run this style of offense and sort of tailored the offense with weapons that fit this scheme perfectly.
Yeah.
And if you want to know why, and we'll get to Rich Rodriguez and what would become of him after this game a little bit later, but if you want to know why Rich Rodriguez was on everyone's radar, right, as a coach for these big-time programs, his success at Pitt and most notably his success with this group of guys was the reason why.
Yeah, he had these guys going and had this program absolutely rolling. When he took over, they weren't great. Got off to a slow start, but in 2005, he was 11-1, won the Sugar Bowl, 11-2 in 2006, won the Gator Bowl, and came in this 2007 season in good shape with Pat White at quarterback, who was very, very good at that time. I remember him a lot because he's from Mobile, Alabama, and he kind of escaped the SEC, ended up at West Virginia. They also have a guy by the name of Noel Devine. Now, you go back to this game, Mike. I want to hear what you remember about Noel Devine before I share what I know about him.
All right, so I only know Noel Devine from a football standpoint. But when you had that three-headed monster in Pat White, Steve Slayton, and Noel Devine, they were like they went together. You know, when you mention guys from a certain team, you're like, oh, West Virginia with Rich Rod? Oh, Pat White, Steve Slayton, Noel Devine. They were just all lightning fast, and they all fit the scheme perfectly. And you wondered why in this game and in this season more particular that it wasn't more Noel Devine on the field a lot and less like an Owen Schmidt, the fullback. It didn't really seem like he fit in what they were doing here. But what I remember about Noel Devine is him just being lightning fast.
He's like one of the very first recruits I can remember through recruiting services. Like the next, like, oh my God, have you seen the video of this kid who breaks 40 tackles on a run and every carry is going for 70 or 80 yards. But it was back when, he was a recruit where he came out in class of 2007. So, I mean, technology wasn't bad during his high school days, but the video footage you'd see of him was super grainy and you couldn't even really tell what he looked like, but you could just kind of see him get into a crowd of players and then escape and then pull away with his dynamic speed. I mean, this guy was like a legend, I'm telling you, a legend in recruiting and recruiting message boards with what he was able to do. His video started popping up as an 8th grader in high school. That's how far back you go.
Yeah, that's great. You hit that on the head. As far as message boards, YouTube highlights, he was one of the first guys that you knew from those. That's a fascinating point, Ben.
Yeah. So
I remember him, and then a little bit later, Jadeveon Clowney became that guy.
That's true. He's definitely that guy that he left my memory because he hadn't really done a whole lot, right? He didn't have an NFL career, and he had a good college career and was a big name here. He's a 5-star recruit, but God, when I heard his name, I was like, oh man, that guy was a legend among recruiting services. So that was very interesting. But the rest of this team, Owen Schmidt, you mentioned him, and only thing I think of Owen Schmidt is being the guy with blood running down his forehead. That's all I think about.
Yeah, just like a typical hardo, big pad fullback. Very good player, by the way. What I said before, I wasn't trying to say he's not a good player.
Just didn't fit the
Very
system.
good player. Just didn't seem like with this scheme they had that he needed to be on the field as much as he was. I would have preferred to see a little more Noel Devine, especially in this game.
Because didn't he would bang his head with helmet off and he'd find a teammate before every game and just slam his head without a helmet against his teammate's helmet, right?
Something to that nature.
Where he would start the game with blood running down his face, right?
Yeah, exactly. He was one of these guys who the fans loved him. He was a crowd favorite. He was Owen Schmidt, the fullback. The announcers never stopped talking about him. One of those guys. Yeah,
he owns a bar, I think, in West Virginia now. Big surprise, probably, right?
That's on brand.
On brand. Who else on this lineup stood out to you, or do you want to highlight? Anybody?
The only other person I remember is Darius Raynaud.
Yeah.
He was the receiver because, again, with this kind of offense they played, it was Pat White, Steve Slayton, Noel Devine,
right,
were the headliners. But then whenever they did pass the ball, it was to a guy like Raynaud.
So that's what we had there. The Heisman race was also going on here. Pat White, as I mentioned, was a big part of that conversation, even though I think the broadcast tried to build up the hype a little bit more because eventually Tim Tebow would win it. Darren McFadden, who they didn't talk about at all, I think, when they mentioned this race. But Pat White ended up finishing 6th, so he wasn't like in the middle of it. And you look at Pat White's numbers. I mean, what we see today, his numbers with 14 touchdowns passing, the 4 interceptions, 1,700 yards passing, doesn't seem great. But, I mean, he was the guy that made that offense work. Yeah,
so like I said before, this offense is not run by every team in the country at this point. So this is new. So the offense has obviously been refined over the years. These quarterbacks are putting up huge numbers. But at this moment in time, Pat White's a little bit of a phenomenon, right? And they mentioned the top 4 in the Heisman in this broadcast as Pat White, Tim Tebow, McFadden, Darren McFadden, and Chase Daniel, the quarterback from Missouri. They made it sound like this was a close Heisman race. And I'm thinking in my head, like, this isn't close. Like, Tebow was the clear Heisman winner.
Right.
Like, he had like an amazing season. You know, when I think of great seasons in college football history, I think of this season for Tim Tebow. I think of Cam Newton's season with Auburn, and I think of Joe Burrow last year. Those are like the 3 seasons I think of.
Yeah, no, that's true. And they did try to, I think it was all just for TV and keeping people interested and giving them a reason to pay attention beyond the obvious with them being ranked where they were. But yeah, they made it out to be a pretty big deal. But speaking of the broadcast, it was on ESPN, and it was a great broadcast team. Mike Patrick, you had Todd Blackledge, you had Holly Rowe, three pros. This was back when Todd was doing his Taste of the Town. Like this, to me, I think from like 95 to about this time, maybe we're a little beyond it, but that ESPN college football primetime game, like it wasn't the CBS ESPN or CBS SEC game. That's the game now for the most part. But that ESPN primetime game was the game to watch every week.
Yeah, and this crew was great. I mean, Todd Blackledge, that taste of the town, was that what it's called?
Yeah. Todd's
that
Taste
was
of the
awesome.
Town.
That was really, it was a good segment. It was well done. Mike Patrick, we've been through this before. He'll always have a soft spot in my heart because he was the big Monday, the Big 12 9:00 game announcer for college basketball. Remember?
Yeah.
You got Mike Patrick, live from Allen Fieldhouse, Kansas versus Oklahoma. That's what I think of when I think of Mike Patrick. And he also did Sunday Night Football back in the day when ESPN had Sunday Night Football. So he was a big name at ESPN for a long time. And Holly Rowe, solid sideline reporter.
Yeah, she's still in there. And when they open up this broadcast, by the way, I love the animation, love the music. Like it gets me fired up to this day still. But the opening song, and they do this more now. I think they just kind of started doing this then from what I can remember. I could be totally wrong. This is kind of when they started bringing in like the commercial music and having like big time names sing a song to open up the college football game coming up. Imagine Dragons does that a lot now. Fall Out Boy, whatever. Dude, the 3 people they had doing the song for this game, Mike, I don't remember it, and I should, because it was the most random group of people to me. What did I miss there? What was the connection?
We'll get to the threesome here in a second that did this song, but what I don't remember was this specific to this game, this song, or was this like a season-long sort of song they played in and out of break?
It's got to be. So, it had to be more than one game. They wouldn't have done it for just this one game.
Yeah, so the song they were playing is a cover to the song "I Just Wanna Celebrate." I don't know the name of the song, and I don't know how to sing, so get over it. But that's the song they're playing, and the 3 people that are playing it are Perry Farrell, the former frontman for Jane's Addiction, 50 Cent, the rapper, and Kelly Rowland from Destiny's Child. Now, at the time, these 3 they were huge names at the time, so we're not talking about just some 3 random people, but them together is just really funny to look back on. And they played this song in and out of breaks, pregame, whenever they could, in typical ESPN fashion.
Yeah, I just quickly Googled it. I just Googled Perry Farrell and Kelly Rowland, and one of the first pictures was this trio sitting, taking like their shot from ABC. But yeah, they did this for ABC ESPN College Football this season. Even in the press release, they mentioned that it was shot in HD, taking you back there high above Times Square. So yeah, I guess they played it all year, but I do not remember this one at all because I guess maybe at the time it didn't seem that far-fetched, but having these 3 people together singing and performing just does not make a lick of sense to me.
Yeah, now it makes zero sense. But back then it's like, oh, we got three huge names. Let's pick a song that's really easy to cover and let's go at it. That was probably the pitch meeting.
I think Perry Farrell, I think he was like a solo artist at this time. Like he had kind of broken away and was doing his own thing at the time. I don't even know.
Yeah, this might shock you, Ben. I am not a huge Jane's Addiction guy. Like I'm not. They were not on the iPod back in the day.
I like a couple of their songs, no doubt. But yeah, random start, and we both wrote that down in our notes.
Save it for the Jane's Addiction podcast.
Are you going to be on that?
No, I'll produce it.
So keys from Blackledge in this game, too, I thought was interesting, just kind of looking back. His keys were run the football with McCoy, tackle in space, and force turnovers. How many of those do you think they did in this game?
Wait, say those again.
Run the football with McCoy. What would you say?
Yes.
B? Got a B on that, maybe?
Yeah.
Tackle in space. Did a pretty good job, I guess.
Yeah, they did.
And then force turnovers, which...
The keys in this game was, if West Virginia doesn't turn the ball over, they have zero shot of ever losing to this Pittsburgh team.
Yeah.
That's what he should have came on and said.
I mean,
they pretty much insinuated that the entire broadcast, but never came right out and said it.
Yeah, I think they did their best to make this feel like it was going to be a competitive game when nobody felt that was going to happen. So we get into the game, and then another ridiculous part of the broadcast that I do not remember again, and I don't know when ESPN's relationship with mixed martial arts began. I thought it was later than this, but the guys they had reading the starting lineups, you know how like they'll have like a celebrity reading a starting lineups, right? Hey, today for your Pittsburgh Panthers, and they go through it. They had Matt Hughes and George St. Pierre. And the best part was George St. Pierre does not speak very good English. So he's like trying to read off a little bit of witty banter about a couple of the key players. And his timing is off completely.
This George St. Pierre, I mean, he must have, when he went back and watched this, he must have been really upset they put him in this situation because he's reading scripted college football introductions of offense and defense, and he's an MMA fighter. Is he French Canadian or is he from France?
He is born in Canada.
Okay, so you have a French Canadian MMA fighter introducing Big East college football offensive and defensive lineups. How do you think that went? with a barrier as far as speaking English goes. It was absolutely terrible, and like you said, it's perfect. His timing was off is like the most nice way to put it.
I'm gonna have to clip that off, and we're gonna have to put that on social, Instagram.
Yeah, I don't know
Twitter.
How we can get that.
I'm gonna get
something that should live in like internet lore. It should be like viral. You should click on that video on YouTube, and there should be 500 million views of him doing these lineups. That's how funny it was.
You know what? You make a good point because I hadn't really thought about that. But in the era of social media, because we're still pre-social media here, we'll get into that a little bit more, kind of where we are in technology. But if that was a thing at that point, there's no escaping that for George St. Pierre. And I mean, granted, it probably would have been great promotion for them because they were obviously cross-promoting a fight, which I don't even think they promoted at all during this game, did they?
No, and the fight wasn't on ESPN either, which is even more perplexing. And let's not make it sound like Matt Hughes was Marv Albert either.
Yeah, no, he wasn't. But
he wasn't really great either. But he
was Vin Scully compared to George St. Pierre.
Yeah. He was Howard Cosell compared to George St. Pierre.
It was incredible. I mean, I don't think we could do it enough justice. You got to go back and watch it. But that was, I mean, obviously a big deal at the time, and ESPN doing its best to promote it. Maybe they were just trying to get in good with them in order to land rights, maybe in retrospect, who knows. But that was an odd combination that we saw early in this game. So let's get in to the actual game itself. I mean, I don't really think there's nearly enough to talk about after all going through all that, Mike. But it was an interesting game in itself. And early on, like the rivalry is what it is. This rivalry probably didn't get enough credit. It's called the Backyard Brawl. I don't even know if we've mentioned that so far. There's so much going on. But the Backyard Brawl, Pitt and West Virginia, these two schools, programs, fans hate each other. I mean, it is one of the best rivalries. It might not get the attention of, Alabama, Auburn, Ohio State, Michigan in football because they aren't usually playing for those same, goals and trophies and championships. But, you saw in the beginning, there was offsetting personal fouls on the very first play of this game.
A very, very intense rivalry. I mean, no question about it. This is the 100th meeting between these two teams, two like very blue collar areas, two areas where football is very, very popular. And sort of the mentality of those fan bases came through on the field. And all kidding aside about the play on the field or lack thereof in this game, there was a lot of intensity.
There was, and in the crowd too. I mean, great. I mean, West Virginia, we know if you're a sports fan, you know what kind of fans they have. They are passionate. That is one way to describe it. So, Pitt, I mean, look, West Virginia gets off to a pretty good start in this game. Get an interception early on after kind of, Pitt runs McCoy. McCoy looks really good to start. Then, you had this pass that was underthrown by a lot. An easy pick for Antonio Lewis. He returned it nearly 50 yards down to the Pitt 27. So, I mean, out of the gates, it was like, you have a picture, Mike? Like, I could go back this time, and I'm thinking of, like, fans at this time. They could probably have West Virginia minus 28.5. Like, there's no way this team's going to go out and lay an egg when they're playing for everything. The team comes out, West Virginia gets a pick on the first possession, returns to the 27, and you're saying, hey, let's go. Let the blowout commence.
Yeah, you're like, oh, man, I'm going to hit this bet in the first half. I can go out afterwards. Let's do it. Let's take the money I'm going to win. Spend it at the bar tonight. We just got an interception. And
look, speaking of, you talking about Schmidt kind of being out of place in terms of offensive schemes, they ran an option to Owen Schmidt in this first possession on offense that like completely threw me off guard.
Yeah, anytime Owen Schmidt has the ball in his hands, it completely throws you off guard.
An option. They pitched it to him. It was amazing. Anyway, so they start on the 27-yard line, and this is a team that had been really good in the red zone. 81 of 87. They flashed it up. 58 TDs. So they were really good. They get down. They have to settle for a field goal. Pitt's defense did. I mean, say what you will about their offense in this game and their team in general, but their defense played with a lot of effort and stood up when they had to, made some big stops in this game. It started on this first drive. I mean, if they get down 7-0 there, Mike, I just think that's a spot where you're already a big underdog. Not a lot of people are believing in you. And then within 3 minutes of the game, 4 minutes of the game, you throw in a pick, and then West Virginia's turned into a touchdown. I mean, at that point, you're probably like, well, maybe everybody was right about what they said about us. But instead, they get a stop, and then on trots Pat McAfee. Do you remember Pat McAfee being the kicker for this team?
I don't. I mean, you look back on it, he was the kicker and the punter for this team. They made remarks during this game about how good he was all season. I do not remember. Pat McAfee's, I don't think I'm out of line saying this. He's the most popular person that emerges from this game in the future, right?
Oh, easily, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we didn't even mention him yet. That's how much other stuff was going on during this game. But no, I did not remember that he was the kicker for this team. Because I didn't remember, to be full disclosure, I didn't remember he was a field goal kicker. So he obviously went on to be a punter in the NFL. Yeah. Yeah,
and the crazy part is, like, he's become such a big name. Like, he is a media star. He crosses over to multiple different platforms.
He's great.
He's awesome.
He is. He's one of these talk show guys that has a huge presence on YouTube. I think it's kind of, one of the niches I think he exploits better than any of the other people that kind of started their own media company. And look, I start clicking on his videos and I can't stop. He's really, really, really good. He's like kind of in his Dan Patrick mold where he has these guys he works with, he takes care of them, and they're like a little family, and it really comes through on his shows.
And the fact that, like, we don't talk about him in this game is what's crazy, because he's completely separated himself from this moment in this game. And in any other situation, I think that kicker, it's hard to overcome how this game played out. Because we see on this first drive, they get down there and they mentioned, like, McAfee had missed 2 kicks all year. He didn't kick a ton, but he had missed, like, his very first kick and then the last kick he had attempted before this game. So he comes in and, it's a chip shot. They get down there and they're driving, looking to score, inside the 10 at this point. And, they're right there knocking on the door at the 2-yard line. And it was crazy because they took, I think, a delay of game to try to maybe move the ball back, give them a little better angle because it's even so close. Declined by Pittsburgh. Smart play. Wannstedt. Your boy Wani. Very good.
Pointing with the crutches, telling the ref we're declining.
He's declining with the crutches, right? Waving it off with 2 crutches.
Wave it crossing the crutches. Yeah, exactly.
And then it turns out to be a great decision because Pat McAfee misses a 20-yard field goal to start.
Yeah, Pat, has he ever talked about his performance in this game on the radio show?
I think he's had to at some point because it's wild because it's not like a mainstream thing. Like, most people don't, when they think about this game, I don't think you think Pat McAfee. He was so under the radar, unassuming, like he wasn't a big name. Most kickers aren't, but there are a lot of kickers now when you think of him, you'd be thinking, oh man, how did I not know this guy was on this team with, his personality and who he is? But you had no idea that this guy was just another college kicker.
Yeah, because, the thing is, when you're watching this now, because you know who Pat McAfee is, he thinks about this game. And I find myself feeling bad for him.
Yeah, but I admire him because he's overcome what happened in this game, because this would destroy anybody, dude. Like, this is like, this is as bad as it gets for a kicker. And this is the start of it. This opening drive, they miss here. So next possession, again, just kind of set up the chippiness. Another offsetting personal fouls. That's 2 of them in the first 5 minutes of this game. There's not a lot else here, but the other big moment is the Pat McAfee moment again. After trading punts back and forth, and he does a good job punting in this game for the most part. But again, they get down deep into Pitt territory, down to the 15-yard line this time. And again, Pitt stands up, and here we go. Pat McAfee, this time from 32. Again, 32 yards for an NFL kicker. Missed again. And you can see, like, he's down, like, kind of bent over, kind of holding his head after this one. It's still 0-0 early in this game, but you've had 2 missed opportunities here. And every single slip-up you have in a game like this gives that other team just a little more belief that they can stay in this ball game.
Yeah, Pitt may have belief sort of sprouting up at this time, but they are doing nothing on offense. It's so bad. It really is. I mean, you notice Shady McCoy is kind of LeSean McCoy with the way he moves, but that's about it. West Virginia is moving the ball, but it's important to remember they're not making any big plays. They're not getting those big chunk plays. Right. And we're 0-0 at the end of the first with the Kelly Rowland, Perry Farrell, 50 Cent rendition of I Want to Celebrate, taking us into the commercial break to end the first quarter.
Exactly. 0-0 after 1, 2 missed field goals.
You could boil this game down to Dave Wannstedt's crutches, Pat McAfee's field goals, and this song. We could have just talked about that the whole podcast.
I think that's probably pretty accurate. Those are 3 of the highlights for sure. But second quarter, Pat White fumbles. And again, it's another opportunity for Pitt. Like, they had these opportunities where they'd get the ball in great field position. I mean, this is a fumble after you've had 2 missed field goals, right? I mean, sure, they had an interception early on, what West Virginia did, but at this point, they're doing everything they can to lose this ball game early on.
They are. The one thing that they mentioned at the top that could lose them the game were turnovers and mistakes. Right now, as of now, you have 2 missed field goals and a fumble by Pat White.
And during this time, too, the guy you can't get injured in this game gets injured. Pat White hurts his hand, his thumb, I think, non-throwing hand, but it's enough pain where he has to come off, and Jarrett Brown has to come in and replace him.
Yeah, and give Jarrett Brown credit. His first drive in relief, he leads the team down for a touchdown, and West Virginia takes a 7-0 lead. Yeah,
he did a good job. I mean, he came on. I mean, not like he's a bum quarterback or anything. Not a bad quarterback here. He's a sophomore. Had a little bit of experience throughout this year, and that more than capable to come in. Let's just say that, and look pretty good early on in that drive. Yeah, and they finally get a 7-0 lead, and this came after a Pitt interception. So Pitt's had really good field position throughout this game, and this, I guess, like watching this game too, probably in the moment, Mike, and I don't really remember. I kind of remember watching a little bit, but don't remember how I felt and kind of following it closely. But I would imagine even like at this point in the game, they go 7-0. You're thinking, okay, West Virginia's done everything they can to lose this game. They're up 7-0. Pitt's showing no signs, 0 signs of like threatening to score at all in this game. Bostic's throwing it kind of all over the place. He's not accurate at all. McCoy's good, but like that's the only guy they got to stop. Like, where are they going to find points in this game? This West Virginia team, sure, it's been a slow start, but they're gonna pull away.
Yeah, that was the thinking when you're watching it for sure. And even when we were watching it now, knowing what the final score was going to be, I'm starting to figure in my head, how does Pitt get to the amount of points that they get to even win the game? That's how bad the offense looked.
Yeah, you're going through that and thinking that as well. And there's some questionable calls in this game too by officials. One happened on that West Virginia touchdown drive. It didn't matter because they scored, but they missed a clear face mask on that play. That was one of the few I felt that went against West Virginia. I felt like a lot of them went against Pitt in this game, which even adds on the fact that Pitt won this game still kind of blows your mind. But Pitt does find a way to get on the scoreboard with a field goal to end the half. 7-3, Mike. 7-3 at halftime in this game. It's a nice 48-yard field goal and gives you a little bit of momentum. You're kind of feeling, okay, maybe we got a little bit of a chance here.
Yeah, now a very questionable personal foul call on West Virginia at the end of the half even put Pittsburgh in field goal range to kick that long field goal.
Yeah.
I think that was a huge part of the game. The refs were very bad in this game. Okay? As probably another major theme, a lot of bad in this game.
Ugly.
In a lot of it in a comical way, but the rest were not. They were just plain bad. West Virginia leading the yardage category, total yards 140 to 75 heading into halftime.
Brutal.
Dave Wannstedt crutch update. He slammed the crutches down when he thought that Pittsburgh got a bad spot. Like he just picked up the crutches, threw them down on the ground. So that's your Dave Wannstedt second quarter crutch update.
We got a halftime. Reese Davis, Lou Holtz, Mark May in the studio. Third quarter, so it's still 7-3. West Virginia gets the ball to start the half. You're looking, hey, to score points. Put it away. That's what you got to do in the game like this. They fumble on the return and give the ball right back to Pitt. But Pitt fails to get a first down. But to their credit, they fake a field goal. Beautiful fake call. Kept the drive alive. Then hit a third down pass. Then they get in. Finally, 10-7. They got the lead, and just all of a sudden, this thing turned.
Yeah, LeSean McCoy with a great drive. Bostic completed a 3rd-and-9 conversion, which flabbergasted me when I saw it. He snuck it in for a touchdown, 10-7. And look, you had a feeling like if West Virginia scored a touchdown instead of fumbling that opening kickoff, that like going up 14-3 would have been too much for Pittsburgh to overcome. But they took advantage of it. And this is at the top point in the game where LeSean McCoy gets rolling.
I think you make a great point. If they ever got up 2 scores in this game, game's over. Yeah. Pitt's not coming back in this ball game if they're down more than 1 score.
Yeah, Pat Bostic in the hurry up, not something you want to see if you're a Pittsburgh fan.
You don't want to take the ball out of LeSean McCoy's hands. There's no question about that. I haven't heard a few boos trickling down about this point in the game. But, look, going back and forth still, West Virginia, because, Pat White's on the sideline, he's still not back in this game either, which is such a big story for them right now. But, McCoy in this Pitt teams is getting ready to go in again, up 10-7. They're driving, and again, this is after a fumble by West Virginia. They had a play where, again, McCoy has a great run, scores a touchdown, looks like they're up right by 2 scores, and there was this phantom hold call that gets whistled that brings the ball back, and it's so bad that even Mike Patrick and Todd Blackledge are just saying we don't know what that referee saw.
This was the worst call of the game. So this would have put Pittsburgh up, like you said, 17-7, and this was the worst call of the game for sure. And what made it worse was that this is the drive they missed the field goal on, wasn't it?
Yeah, so they did miss that one. So it turned into a huge turn of events here. And again, like I'm watching this game going, how in the world does West Virginia not win this game? I mean, they're playing such a bad team, and a bad team that even though they're not playing very well themselves and they've had their injured quarterback, like this team is not doing anything special in this ball game.
No, they're really not. This is not an underdog seizing the moment. This is a West Virginia team in the third quarter who only ran 4 plays the entire quarter for -5 yards total. And now you have a situation where Pittsburgh's taking the lead, like we mentioned earlier in the quarter. And that Pat White injury seems to have decimated the entire team and the entire stadium, because what we didn't mention yet is that Pat White came out of halftime in street clothes.
Right, yeah. Looked like no hope for him.
Bandage on his thumb. So and now you feel like, oh, there's no hope, or there's less hope.
And your boy Wani was pretty fired up at this point in the game.
Oh, Wani is peak crutches, where we may have an actual chance to win this, and if I could will my team, I'm going to do it.
And if I can't, these crutches are going on the field somehow. Like, there's no doubt.
Yeah. Main thesis, crutches.
Crutches. Fourth quarter, I thought it was a very interesting tie, too. They go back to West Virginia's only other championship game. And in that game, they had a quarterback injury. Like, pretty wild that that's happened. Like, that, I don't know if this is talked about within West Virginia fans, and maybe it's like a thing they talk about a lot, but that seems like a pretty big deal. Like, hey, every time we've had a chance, and it hadn't happened a lot, but every time we've had a chance, our quarterback gets injured.
Look, West Virginia football, when I think of West Virginia football, I think of Major Harris and I think of Pat White. End of story. So the fact that both of these guys got hurt in the biggest games of their career is terrible for West Virginia fans.
Yeah, that's a good point. But it's just crazy they had that ready to go, and it was a well done by ESPN to have that ready to go. But another big turnover by West Virginia, sack, fumble. Now we're under 10 minutes to play. Again, it's a tight game, but just West Virginia can't, at this point, they just can't do anything. I mean, they've completely fallen off as well. Their offense isn't moving. They're just making mistakes, turning the ball over. But they're still in it because as bad as they played, what could Pitt do? Not a lot. The defense kind of stood up because they had good field position there. Held them to just a field goal. 13-7. There's 6:17 left. And in this moment, again, you're still, as a West Virginia fan, I got to imagine, you still feel pretty good about where you stand. And on the other side, as a Pitt fan, this is one of those situations, Mike, where you're like, man, we're down. We're only up 6, and there's 6 minutes left. Everything we've done, it doesn't matter because a touchdown, this game's over.
Yeah, and you must be thinking like, there's no way this team is just not going to make any explosive plays the whole game, right? Like that's West Virginia was the most explosive team in the nation that year, possibly. And then what makes matters worse for a Pittsburgh fan is the valiant return of Pat White, who comes in for the next drive.
Yeah, it seemed like
somehow he got his pads and his helmet. He was on street clothes 5 minutes earlier, but he got his pads and his helmet, and he's coming back into the game.
I think he saw that offense was like, man, I got to do whatever it takes at this point.
Yeah, seriously.
And he was,
one touchdown drive is going to do this here. Let's see if I can do it.
That's it. I just got to stand up for one drive and finish it off. And it starts off great because Noel Devine, huge return. They get this return down to the 33-yard line, Mike. This huge return to the 33, and you got Pat White coming in. This is like the storybook of all storybooks.
Yeah. We have not mentioned Noel Devine or Steve Slayton at all. Steve Slayton was maybe the marquee running back on this team. We haven't mentioned his name at all. First big play by Noel Devine on this return, like you mentioned, Pat White coming in, and they have all the momentum right now.
All of it. It just seems like if you're a Pitt fan, you're just like, okay, let me just prepare for this to happen. It's going to happen at some point. This is it. It was a great run, valiant effort, scared them, but we did the best we could in this game, and it feels that way. Absolutely feels that way. And again, they flashed up the stat too to show you where the offense is. Fewer than 50 yards of total offense since White left that game in the second quarter. Now he's back in. Here we go. But Pitt gets him to third down. Big fumble, kind of loose ball by Pat White. Loses some yardage. Fourth down, ball to the end zone. Nothing. And it's like that. It went from we're going in to holy cow. We just turned it over on downs against Pitt again. We cannot score anything. Like, where are we at right now? I wonder, they weren't, I don't remember where they were exactly in the field, Mike, but definitely it felt like they were within range of McAfee there. I wonder if he was just like, man, I don't want to send McAfee back out there because what's happened.
Yeah, they doubted that McAfee there. There was a point in the game where you're like, man, a field goal might make sense here. But
yeah.
Again, just another unfortunate thing for McAfee, but yeah, I got that feeling too.
Dude, you have 4 minutes left. That's still plenty of time, 2 timeouts, and you got an offense that can't move the ball very well in Pittsburgh. You get a field goal there, it's a 3-point game. You can still, tie it up. I just kind of wonder where they had lost a little bit of faith in McAfee. So Pitt gets the ball back, looking to kind of ice this game, right? It's over 4 minutes. They have a couple of timeouts they got to burn for West Virginia, but again, another moment where Pitt fans are just probably pulling out their hair. Wannstedt's got crutches that are about to be stuck where the sun doesn't shine because a beautiful play call on a third down, kind of a misdirection toss back to McCoy, and he's got space, gets a first down, and they call a hold on a receiver blocking out in front of him. That again in the replay, Blackledge is even breaking it down. Hey, if the hands are outside the pads, that's going to be a hold all day. If they're inside the pads, you're probably good. And they made the point, this receiver's not even trying to fight to get off the block. He's getting pushed out of bounds. It's a pretty clear block, and they call a hold here to back him up, and they don't get the third down.
Is the same receiver who got the infraction on the touchdown run, by the way.
Yep.
And we've been on Pittsburgh's offense making fun of them the whole game, but this was a great play call.
It was.
And like you said, unfortunately, it gets called back.
It did, and they couldn't do anything out. They drive stalls out. They have to get the ball back to West Virginia with 3 minutes left. Pat White again, still doing pretty well here, but they don't do anything. And I don't remember, to me in this game, I don't remember what you remembered about this game, but to me, I thought West Virginia had a chance to win late. I guess they did in theory, they were driving with down 6 points. But to me, I felt like there was a moment where they had a missed kick to win it or something. That's kind of how I remember this game. Much more so than everything kind of happened early and they just kind of petered out at the end. Because every time I expected some kind of big drive to come, it just didn't happen. And they turned the ball over on downs. The minute 35 left, Pitt ran out the clock, finished it off with a safety out of the back of the end zone, went 13-9, and that was it.
Yeah, and Look, they got it down to the 21-yard line going in on this last drive that you just mentioned, right? They had a big Pat White run, gets him to the 21-yard line. He completed a 20-yard pass to Raynaud on the drive. But then when they got to the 20, they passed the ball 4 times, which I thought was pretty bad play calling, especially when you have a team that's so prolific running the ball. You don't run the ball 1 time. They have a turnover on downs, and that's all she wrote.
That was it. And going back and watching this, man, I mean, if there was ever a worse performance in a big spot, like I don't know where it was, because I get the Pat White injury, but this West Virginia team, they had 93 yards passing in the game. They had 104 yards rushing total. Steve Slayton finished with 9 carries for 11 yards. Noel Devine had 7 carries for 11 yards. Okay, their offense did nothing, and Pitt sure benefited from a few turnovers, but they didn't do much with the ball. I mean, McCoy had a great game. 38 carries, $148, okay? Great game for McCoy. Bostic threw for 67 yards and 2 interceptions. 67 yards and 2 picks. And they have bad call split against Pitt, it felt. Like, I don't know what else they could have gotten to go their way to win that game. That was one of the worst performances I've seen in a spot like that.
Terrible performance. You could make the argument that LeSean McCoy was the only player who played good in the entire game. Literally both rosters, no one played well. And it's not like West Virginia needed some, sort of crazy thing to happen to win this game. They literally, it's cliche, but they literally needed one big play, one big turnover to win this game, and they just couldn't get it done. And those stats you mentioned with the total yardage are absolutely eye-popping, considering how high-powered this offense was all season.
Yeah, it makes no sense at all. And because of that upset, it obviously changed kind of the course of history in a lot of ways, because LSU now, because of that, was able to jump up from 7-2, got into the championship game against the Ohio State team, who was upset literally second to last game of the season. They lost to Illinois. Hawaii was undefeated at that time, but again, against the WAC, I mean, it was really no argument there. And it was just, trying to change everything. And then plus from there, Mike, Michigan ends up hiring Rich Rod out of all this too. And it's crazy how this whole thing kind of went from this game, like for all these guys. And I even think, especially for like McAfee, like it's crazy how those 2 field goals, to me, I remember it being more of the kicker blew that game, more so than it actually was when I went back and watched. Like the 2 misses came early in the game, and then McAfee didn't really have an impact from that. And the 2 field goals obviously would have sent that game to overtime if it all played out the way it did. But I don't think it was his fault. It was probably his worst, probably his low light of his career. But just to me, going back to that game, I just was like, man, I thought it was more kicker than it was. It's just an all-around bad performance.
Yeah, McAfee wasn't the reason they lost. What it was if he hits those 2 field goals, they're up 6-0. Then they score the touchdown. Now it's 13-0, as we mentioned, with Bostic, who passed for 65 yards in the game, trying to come from behind from 13-0. That lead probably would have seemed insurmountable. So that's more where McAfee comes into it. Rich Rodriguez, remember, he didn't even coach them in the bowl game. West Virginia would go on to play Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. And I specifically remember watching that Fiesta Bowl with you. I don't know if you remember. And us both saying, boy, this team is going to get fooled into thinking that Bill Stewart is going to be a good coach.
Oh, yeah, God.
And they're going to hire him, and it's going to be a huge mistake because they crushed Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl that year, 48-28.
I forgot about Bill Stewart.
It was everyone loves Bill Stewart. What a great guy. He's been around forever. And you knew, like, wow, this is going to be a disaster if they hire him. And they did it. And the next era in West Virginia football wasn't that great.
I had completely forgotten about Bill Stewart. Holy cow.
Yeah, he's very forgettable.
Now, I do remember that now. But he didn't have to give him, in fairness, he was 28-12 as a head coach there. They were never at the same level they were in this season, but they weren't a team that goes and starts winning 3 or 4 games a year. I mean, he was there. But, yeah, you just knew, like, he wasn't the guy to elevate him.
Yeah, losing 3, but 28-12 is what, in 3 seasons or 4 seasons? That's losing, 3 games a year in the Big East, which back then wasn't great. I don't know. Yeah,
and by the way, did you even realize that I didn't realize Stewart died of a heart attack back in 2012? Oh. Did you realize that?
That makes me feel terrible now what I just said about
it. Well, I mean, listen, it is what it is. I mean, but yeah, crazy.
I did not know that. No.
Crazy. And again, who knows what would happen with Les Miles, who didn't win a championship that year with 2 losses. I mean, definitely the benefit of the doubt there, and help keep his profile up for many years to come, even though maybe he wasn't that great. And then Rich Rod. I mean, Rich Rod, if you watch this game, if you went back, if you're a Michigan fan or Arizona fan, you went back and watched this game, and just the expressions on his face, like he looked lost a lot of times. Like you could tell he was frustrated a lot of times in this game, like knew it was slipping away from him and didn't have that control over his team and didn't seem confident. Like in the moment where he was playing a 4-7 team, like you could go back to that moment and watch this game and go, probably should have seen that coming.
Yeah, hey, look, from as much as we made fun of Wannstedt, he looked in total control of his team in the sideline. Rich Rod, I don't want to say he looked – I will say he looked nervous. As the game went on, he looked really nervous. And look, it's one of those things where, man, we hired this guy. Like once Michigan, sort of, you found out what Rich Rod was all about. Now, Rich Rod can coach offense. There's no doubt about that. He can create an offense where you put points on the board. But a head coach, I don't think this was the best run for him as a head coach. And this was the last game where he was the coach of a really good team.
Right. And this, by the way, too, was Steve Slayton. Remember, you mentioned how good he was, and most people might not remember that much, but he was a Playboy All-American that year. You remember the Playboy All-Americans? I totally forgot that. I don't know when that ended, but that was a big thing, too, back then as well.
Yeah, Steve Slayton was a good player.
He was good. Let's go to some outdated. I got to get some outdated here because this game was awesome with commercials.
Great.
First thing, the first iPhone commercial. That was pretty awesome to watch.
Yeah, so if for those of you who don't remember the first iPhone commercial, it was the one where they had that very identifiable music playing in the background, and they were kind of teaching you all the features of the phone through the commercial.
Right.
And it's just it's a classic commercial, like just iconic if you go back and look. Because
you pair that with, there was a couple commercials, at least one I remember seeing, where there was a flip phone shooting video. Right. Or there was maybe it was in the crowd. There were flip phone shooting videos. So to show you how like kind of where we were in that moment versus where we ended up getting thanks to the iPhone, like this was the end of an era.
Yeah, we're at the intersection of flip phone, BlackBerry, and iPhone right now.
You can guess which one won that meeting.
Yeah.
Another one I love, like this was around Christmas time, so some great classic Christmas commercials. The Garmin song. Gimme, 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 gimme Garmin. That one was awesome. I remember that commercial a lot. That great jingle. Beyonce and the Let Me Upgrade You commercial with DirecTV, another song that will stick in your head forever.
Those are 2 classic commercials. You had Brett Favre Wrangler commercials throughout this game.
Yep.
Those are 4 like iconic commercials we just mentioned. The Garmin one, the Beyonce Let Me Upgrade You, the iPhone one, and the Brett Favre Wrangler. Golden era for promotional commercials.
And it goes beyond that. Yeah.
The best one of all time, the best one in this game, though, was not any of those. We must have been watching a local feed from New York because one of the local commercials was for coin galleries of Oyster Bay, and Keith Hernandez was the spokesman.
Oh, you loved it.
I loved it, dude. Keith in all his glory. Picture like one of those little bit of grainy local commercials that shot kind of in standard definition for a local coin gallery on Long Island, and Keith Hernandez is the spokesman.
Keith would have done anything, right, for a paycheck, it sounds like, based on that.
Yeah, he's from out there, too.
Okay. That makes
he's from, yeah, so he may, not from, but he lives out, he's lived out there for a while, I think so.
Anything else outdated?
Long John Silver's advertised a $3.99 meal right off the top. How much you think? I think they were the first commercial, first break.
Yeah, I don't know what, probably would have run about what, $150?
They were like, look, our target market is pretty much West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania for our $3.99 meal. So we need to get on here. Also, and this is when Sirius Radio and XM Radio were 2 separate companies. Yeah. And there was an XM Radio commercial here too.
Yeah, no Sirius commercial. XM was there. Yeah, that's a good point too. I noticed that as well. Those are great. And you talk about social, and we kind of hit on it. The intro or the lineups by George St Pierre would have definitely been a social media sensation, but there were so many good crowd shots in this game. And then again, because this is a time where like you don't take a crowd shot and it automatically becomes a meme. There were so many in this game that would have turned into memes at some point on social media.
Dude, the people who started, I don't know, Twitter was started by this point, but if it wasn't, the people who started Twitter were probably watching this game and they were probably like, man, if we could talk about this game like on social media right now, we need to develop an app that sort of captures that.
I know.
Because there was so much stuff that would have killed on Twitter. Between the intro song, Dave Wannstedt's crutches, the Keith Hernandez commercial, the crowd reaction, Hughes and St Pierre, it would have been all the chaos going on in the games that were on at the same time. It would have been an all-time Twitter moment.
Twitter was technically founded the year prior. I don't know when they actually kind of launched things, but it was definitely in its infancy and barely being used at that point. But yeah, would have been a game changer. What else, Mike? We kind of talked about where everybody's been since then. Not a lot in terms of NFL potential from here, outside of a couple names we mentioned. Anything else from this game that you want to close out with?
The only thing else that was going on during this game was Jimmy V week.
Yes,
which was always. Do they still do that? I'm assuming they do. It's around this time.
Yeah, I think
around this time.
We're recording this Jimmy V week.
Okay, yeah. So it's sort of like when college football and college basketball are going on at the same time, and it's a big event and a fundraiser for ESPN and the Jimmy V Foundation. So again, you always remember when you see Jimmy V, involved with anything.
Yeah, no question. Well, this was a fun to go back, Mike. There was so much to this game. I mean, it was nonstop with things to talk about and to write down and to notice. And the game itself wasn't played very well. It was a very important game, I think, for the history of college football, and one that West Virginia fans will probably talk about forever. I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure Pitt fans talk about it. It's probably a big deal for them, but this game's got to stick around a lot more for West Virginia fans and what they maybe missed out on. I don't know. Do you think it would have been them and Ohio State in that championship game. Do you give them a chance against 2007 Ohio State? Now, remember, LSU went and beat that team, but LSU would not have been there. It would have been Ohio State.
No, I think Ohio State was better than this West Virginia team. Just from what we saw in this game, it's hard to really say they would have beat Ohio State. It's just hard when you have this taste in your mouth from this game and how bad they were.
Yeah.
We went through all this stuff, Ben, and we didn't even mention that Colt Brennan and Hawaii were undefeated and we're going to play in the late game this Saturday night.
Love the late night whack.
In a normal college football season, Hawaii being undefeated with a prolific passer like Colt Brennan would have been front page news.
There's so much to talk about. This was an incredible year.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Incredible finish to this season, and wow. Glad we went back and watched it, Mike. We got to close it out. We went on for a little while, but that was a lot of fun. And I'd encourage you to watch this game yourself. It's worth the time. And again, for a football game, it's not that long. Under 3 hours on the YouTube link, which is on our website, distantreplaypodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube as well. We'd love to have you connect. Hit subscribe, rate, and review. We appreciate all the feedback. Thanks for those that have been listening. Greatly appreciated. And a lot of fun, Mike.
Yeah, this was an awesome time. And until next time.